Rise for a moment of silent reflection. Thank you. We are at disclosure of pecuniary interest. Does any member have pecuniary interest to declare? Seeing none. Mr. Cribbs, we arise and report motions of the in-camera session.
Nothing to report at this time. Thank you, Warden.
Thank you, Mr. Cribbs. We have a delegation this morning, our director or our manager of planning and development to present the draft county official plan for review. Council will remember that once the draft was prepared, Council asked for the draft to come back for its own discussion around the draft before we would go out for public consultation. And because Mr. Posliff is staff, we don't need a motion for him to come past the bar. And in interest of timing, we've talked briefly with Mr. Posliff. If he can compress in interest of timing, that would be good. Thank you. Mr. Posliff.
Find my mouse. Sorry, my mouse is not responding here.
Is it on?
Wrong mouse. Thank you. Thank you, Warden McDougall and members of County Council for the opportunity to come and speak with you today about the draft official plan that we've prepared for your consideration. You'll recall that the discussion at the September committee meeting was just as the Warden had said, that we would bring this back to you for a quick overview, and we were also asked to provide a summary of how any public comments that we received through the circulation of the background reports, how they were dealt with in the draft official plan. So I have done that. And we will try, as you've asked, to condense where we can, and it'll be a pretty quick overview, but we'll do our best to keep that rolling. So I think most of you are pretty familiar with the general framework in Ontario. We have a provincial policy statement. Everything we do has to be in line with the provincial policy statement. We have county official plans, such as ours. We've had one in force since the late 90s. And those take those PPS policies and put them in a local context and sort of give a broad-based overview of things that are of interest to the county as a whole. The local official plans get much more detailed, generally more regulatory, and those really detailed maps and policies you will find in your local official plans. And the Planning Act obviously is legislation that governs all these things, and it requires those PPS consistencies and other matters. Again, the current official plan was prepared over about 3 years in the late 90s, and it served us very well, but certainly it's overdue for an update, and there are things in terms of legislation and policies and emerging issues that we need to deal with in our official plan and update it for. Just touching on some of the main themes of the update that we'll cover today, we really wanted to focus on quality of life. We know we have a good quality of life here, but it's important to maintain that and enhance that. We all recognize that we've had some challenges in Lambton County demographically, economically. We're not alone in that. Those are trends that we see across rural Ontario. But if we don't make an effort to maintain and enhance our quality of life and make ourselves an attractive community, it'll be tough to get over those struggles. So again, quality of life, economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, those are things that are found in the county's strategic plan as some of our main goals. And we also want to bring together and integrate some of the policies and initiatives that have been undertaken by other county departments and divisions and those in the broader community as well. We've certainly worked with a number of those groups over the years on some of those initiatives, and it's important that we pull those together. So I'll take you through very quickly on a chapter-by-chapter basis. We've given you the draft official plan to look at. You'll see that there's a lot of strikeouts and additions and things, and we certainly don't aim to go through every one of those. We'd be here forever doing that. So we're just going to try and hit those high points. So in terms of quality of life, that's Chapter 2, and we're using the basic format of the existing official plan to move forward as well, again, because it's done pretty well for us over the years. So we want to integrate cultural as integral to community sustainability, and that comes from the cultural plan and the sustainability plan, both adopted by County Council. We want to make sure that we have stable, affordable housing. That comes through the affordable housing strategy, again adopted by Council. We've included source protection policies required by the Clean Water Act and the Source Protection Plan. We want to support access to healthy local food. That's a growing trend, a growing outlook, and we want to make sure that we do what we can to support that as well. Climate change is new to the plan. I think you're all aware of the discussions around that. Some of the things that we can do to help with that going forward are to facilitate active transportation and transit, to make sure that stormwater and other design and policies and practices are adequate moving forward on subdivision and development. We may need emergency management strategies for extreme weather events, and we want to work with private and public sector partners to look at improvements we can make and reduce the impact on climate change. Again, I touched on the sustainability plan, so we include encouragement for green development standards, energy efficiency, and effective and efficient community design all contributes to community sustainability. Chapter 3 is community development and growth. We have a provincial policy statement requirement that counties and regions are to coordinate population projections and demographic work. We've done that. Those have been adopted by County Council on 2 different occasions, the first report and an updated one following the last census. We want to make sure that we monitor those population and development activities to make sure that what we're doing is relevant and appropriate. We allow local planning at the local level to determine detailed settlement boundaries within the parameters.
Excuse me, Mr. Bosloff, I'm going to recognize a question from Councillor Gillis. Okay. We might as well do that on the way through if there are compelling issues.
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Warden. I appreciate that. I wasn't sure exactly what the process was going to be. With regard to population growth, at City Council, we've had a similar presentation, but not on the official plan, but just recently, and have noticed that there has been population growth occurring in the city and is projected to be even more next year. So I was a little concerned when I saw this because I wasn't sure if we were looking at it from county-wide and taking the county as the entity and creating our official plan that way, or if we were incorporating on a secondary plan the municipalities that are experiencing some growth, because obviously there are some. So I was a little concerned because obviously if you project for no growth or below growth, it's going to be different. Your plan is going to be different than if you are experiencing growth and looking into the future. So the whole dynamic might change. Even though we're only experiencing a little bit of growth, there is growth occurring, and it would appear that there will be more in the future. So can you rectify that for me?
Councillor, thanks for the question. Thank you for the question. Oh. There we go. Thank you for the question. It's a little bit of both. As I mentioned, the provincial policies require sort of a coordination at the county level, but we certainly consult with all the local municipalities in the preparation of their own planning documents. And we've certainly been in contact over the years with the city in that regard. And we, at the time council adopted those projections, certainly the direction was to monitor them and make sure that they're working, that the planning policies that implement them are working properly. And there's, adequate supply of land designated for growth and all those types of things. So that kind of mechanism is built into the plan, and we will certainly do that moving forward to make sure we're on the right track.
Councillor Napper?
Warden McDougall, just clarification, Dave. Changes to the Lakeshore Policy Area Settlement. It says along Lambton Lakeshore to match local OP plan. So if we pass this today, we haven't passed our official plan yet. So will that be added at that time, or how's that going to work? Like, I think we've had some problems with OMB hearings where there's some been mix-ups there.
Thank you, Warden McDougall. We're quite some time away from passing a county official plan. We won't do that today, and we want to make sure that council's aware of what's in it. We'll do some more public consultation, and we'll work directly with you on making sure that that's coordinated.
Okay, continue then,
Okay.
Mr. Powell.
So just continuing on that theme, we want to make sure that we maintain healthy main streets and commercial areas that can foster the emerging cultural and creative community and economy. We want to promote brownfield development. We had quite a bit of feedback on that through the consultation, and people are quite happy to see that. It can be difficult to implement and get going, but generally speaking, it's an efficient way to do things, and everybody likes to see that kind of infilling and environmental sustainability as well associated with brownfield redevelopment. So we want to support that, and that's generally through community improvement plans. As Mayor Napper said, we are looking at making some changes to the Lakeshore Policy Area and settlement area boundaries to make sure that we align with what the local municipality wants to do in that regard. Chapter 4 is agriculture. First item there is just to simply remove the Blackwell Marsh, as it's referred to in the county's official plan, as a locally significant specialty crop area, and the city has done that in their new official plan as a result of a comprehensive study that was done on that area. So again, to be aligned with that.
Councillor McGugan?
Council, through you to David, I saw that was removed. Is that because we're going to make that all residential? It's lucky some of the finest land in the world.
Mr. Pazza?
Thank you, Councillor. No, that's not the reason. It's just, again, that that area was studied by agronomists and crop scientists and professionals in the field, and it was determined that it did not meet the criteria for being a specialty crop area. It doesn't mean that the city has designated that for future development at this time. Continuing with agriculture, we want to make sure that we support agriculturally related use and on-farm economic diversification. This is something of a new idea. Provincial policies now allow a little broader range in that regard. It used to be that the ag area was meant to be, just strictly agriculture. But we recognize that there's an emerging economy related to agriculture and value-added uses and diversification in that area, while at the same time protecting the agricultural resource while we do that. Looking at niche markets, agritourism, again, local food, and on-farm processing of products and byproducts. Again, we do want to make sure that we preserve the rural character and the long-term agricultural viability of the area so that those types of things don't get out of control. We would propose to, we have to remove the residential infilling severance policy to be consistent with the PPS. However, the surplus dwelling option would remain for rural residential severances. And here's the item that we'll discuss later, I'm sure. As of now, we would maintain the 40-hectare farm size standard, but introduce some new policies to look at local municipalities lowering that as low as 20 hectares, subject to some criteria. And again, we're open to discussion on that later on. Chapter 5 is economic growth. We want to support and integrate the strategic blueprint of the economic partnership and recognize that they would be the lead agency in economic development in the county. Again, the same theme, look at quality of life and livable communities as economic drivers, support the bioeconomy in the region, look at regional tourism and recreation, and support things like manufacturing and consulting associated with renewable and alternative energies. I think that was an item in that strategy as well. We do need to recognize that there needs to be a balance between environment, society, culture, and the economy.
Councillor Bradley has a question.
Question on the what's missing. One of the big targeted areas which has a lot of county impact is food production, and I don't see that listed there as a key economic growth.
Mr. Positive.
Thank you, Councillor Bradley. We can certainly make sure that we insert that. We cover that in the agricultural chapter, the support for local food and food distribution hubs and things like that. But
on the end product, that food production and manufacturing of food production is a missing link in our economy here, and that's one of the strategies of the economic partnership. Good example is in London, the Dr. Dechter pizza place. That's a huge economic impact on the farm community and on jobs. So I think it's a key strategy for us. It's a difficult one because our service area doesn't work well for us when it's the GTA, but we have focused on that, and I'd like to see it acknowledged.
thank you. We'll make sure we include that. Support for expanding existing businesses, creative and emerging economies, community improvement areas. Some of our municipalities have had good luck with regenerating their communities through community improvement areas and community improvement plans. We can continue to do that. Make sure that we have services and infrastructure there to provide a growth-ready environment, and support linkages within and outside the county, such as advocating for air and train services to make sure that we're not operating in isolation here in Lambton County.
Councillor Bradley.
That air, rail, and bus transportation. Because internal county, external county, bus transportation is probably our best new initiative.
Duly noted. Thank you. Just finishing up economic growth, we want to support high quality and high speed telecommunications, protect and enhance the vitality of existing economic activity, and again, this theme of downtowns, commercial areas, and brownfield sites. Tourism and promotion is Chapter 6. Again, this is not meant to be a tourism plan or any of these other sectors, but it is meant to sort of pull things together and support other activities. So we support the inclusion of cultural heritage, a regional scale economy in tourism, agritourism, natural and cultural heritage assets, trail networks, things like the Waterfront Trail and our oil heritage areas.
Councillor Arnold.
And yet we don't want to have anything but large farms, and we don't want to have the Blackwell Marsh be developed as an agricultural area. Are we not in conflict with ourselves? Because I don't know too many of agritourism places that are 100 acres or 200 acres or 300 acres. Most of them are smaller niche markets and small things that people go and look at. Not too many guys want to go, and not too much agritourism goes to a soybean farm or a wheat farm or a corn farm to see what's going on. They usually look at neat things. And it just seems like when I read through this, and maybe it's a bad time to speak to this, but it seems like there's a tremendous amount of conflict in the agricultural thing. And the reason why Blackwell Marsh wouldn't be looked at as a viable place was because I think it's Class 6 farmland. Well, nobody wants to develop Class 6 farmland, and the reason why it's Class 6 farmland was because it was a marsh. And yet that's, as was spoke to by Councillor McGugan, it's some of the richest land in Ontario and the world. And because I farm it, so I know a little bit more than maybe some of the folks do. However, when we look at this whole thing, small farms still can create tourism and business and viable farm operations, and yet we don't want them. So I'm trying to understand how agritourism fits into this whole county official plan. So, you know, and David, I've gone through this document a couple of times, and it seems like it's really pushing towards, there's a thinking that agritourism can only take place in a large farm venue, which I don't agree with. So I don't know how we can incorporate that in there. It's probably just a conversation. So.
Mr. Posliff, would you like to speak to that?
Thank you, Councillor, for those comments. I certainly understand. We do, as I've noted, there's a number of areas where we do support those niche markets and value-added agricultural operations and things like that. Those can occur on any size of farm, and I think we also have provisions for, we've always had provisions in the official plan for smaller lots for specialty crop situations and special types of operations and things like that.
Follow up.
In the official plan, because it says nothing under 20 hectares. So that's 50 acres. So there's no provision for a 5-acre garlic farm or somebody that wants to grow flowers or anything like that unless you are a multimillionaire. And that's not how we encourage development and starting out. People have to start out small. You can't afford to go and buy even 50 acres and put it under glass to grow peppers or flowers or whatever, unless you got pockets that are deeper than even Don McGugan sitting here in the chamber. So, you know, when we look at an official plan, I really believe strongly that we have to have it so it's in the plan that we're encouraging smaller operations to start. But we don't do that. We have it, and we're hard on a lot of things in here that it's an impossible hoop to jump through to make a small farm in this county.
Mr. Posliff?
Thank you. I can find the reference from the existing official plan about allowing for the creation of lots for specialty crop uses and things like that. I'll make sure that we dig that up for you.
Councillor Bradley?
One of the growth areas, big growth areas for a lot of reasons, demographics and other reasons, which we're focused on here in Sarnia Lambton and now are leading the way in this region and more likely the province too, is disability accessibility tourism, especially with the demographic of where Canada's going. But accessible disability tourism is a huge growth business.
Thank you. We can note that as well, Councillor Bradley. Thank you. Chapter 7 relates to infrastructure. One of the things that the official plan has never really done is recognize the importance and the presence of the Dawn compressor station as an economic opportunity and supplier of vital services for our area and others. So we would propose to do that at this time.
Sorry, 2 questions. I'll recognize Councillor Bradley first and then Arnold.
No disrespect to the Dawn compressor station, which I understand is very important to the economy. Is that being highlighted? There's many other places in this county that merit distinction as an economic impactor. So again, no disrespect to Dawn, but is this an isolated recognition, or are we recognizing the pillars of strength throughout our different communities that are economic infrastructure?
I would say, Councillor Bradley, thank you. What we've run into over the years is requests and proposals for expansions to the operations at the Dawn compressor station, and it's never been recognized on the county official plan, and again, in theory, what's done locally is supposed to conform to the county plan. So we've always kind of not had that connection. So all we really want to do is recognize that it's there and allow for its expansion and continued operation where necessary.
Question, then is the valley recognized as a key part of infrastructure for for Sarnia, St. Clair, and everyone else?
Thank you. The county official plan has always recognized the Chemical Valley, the petrochemical center. It's always been designated for those purposes, and there's a large purple area on the map that has always been designated to recognize that.
Councillor Arnold.
Having said that, it's on the map. It's not written anywhere. And the other piece is there's no recognition of the Tecumseh gas compressor station, which is almost as big as Dawn. Not quite, but almost. And there's also, and that Enbridge owns it now, it's expanded 3 times in the last 5 years. We also have the Enbridge oil battery, which is one of the largest underground storage outside of the illustrious oil springs that in the modern times, and that's not recognized. So I guess I have to concur with Councillor Bradley as to why are we picking out the Dawn compressor station? Is it just to put it on the map too, so that we can have kind of a shared thing with Dawn, and so they feel included in the group, or what? Because Tecumseh preceded Dawn, and I guess that's why I wonder why they get special recognition and something that's older and been there longer doesn't.
Order, Mr. Posliff.
Perhaps we can come up with some efforts to make sure that those are noted. I'm happy to do that.
Fair, okay.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Posliff.
Thank you. Second point there under infrastructure is to make sure that we consider various modes of transportation when we're looking at roads projects, whether that includes things like complete streets, facilitating alternative transportation, transit, all those types of things when we're doing that kind of work. We want to encourage an interconnected trail system.
Councillor Napper.
Can you tell me what's the definition of a trail?
Mr. Posliff.
Generally, it's anything that would facilitate a variety of non-motorized transportation. It's walking, cycling. Wouldn't think of a street as a trail. Finally, we want to facilitate telecommunication services while also making sure that we protect agriculture, settlement areas, and natural heritage areas. You may be aware that Industry Canada is the approval authority for things like telecommunications towers, and they're supposed to consult with local municipalities. Sometimes it happens in a more meaningful way than others, but we want to make sure that we have some policies in there to make sure that that does happen, and talk about what we want them to consider locally when they're looking at those proposals.
Councillor McGugan.
To Dave, you talk about telecommunications. They don't even have to get a building permit. We just had one built. Now, they were very good, and they did come and talk to council and make presentations, but they didn't have to get a building permit. Am I correct? They are exempt from basically everything.
It's maybe a little bit outside my area, but I think that they're actually governed being a federally approved project. There's a national building code that I believe they had to, which I think is maybe outside our processes, yes. Okay, talking about renewable energy. Again, recognizing the position of County Council, but also recognizing that this is out there. We recommend new policies to talk about community interests, consultation, information that proponents are required to provide to the county and to its local municipalities. We encourage agreements where appropriate, where that would benefit municipalities. And obviously, we want to mitigate the negative environmental, social, servicing, and infrastructure impacts of these projects. A lot of people, when thinking of...
Councillor Bradley, sorry to interrupt, Mr. Posliff. I'm just grabbing them while I can see them.
And I thank you. I apologize because I have to leave, but I want to cut to the chase. Wind turbines, where do they fit into this policy?
Thank you, Councillor Warden. This is what we're speaking about here. Could be wind turbines, could be solar projects. Okay, in terms of saying.
See, the renewable energy definition. What is that? Is it battery storage? Is it? Like what I'm saying, it's an identified issue. Why aren't we being more clear about what we're dealing with here? And that doesn't mean that it's, there's a proper solar project, it's not going to go and it's not going to happen. It's just, why aren't we saying what we're talking about?
Thank you, Councillor. I believe we do say that in the actual official plan policy. This is just sort of a summary of them, but we'll make sure that if that's Council's wish, that those are specifically mentioned in the official plan. Okay. Again, most people, when thinking about the Green Energy Act, think that it's just the promotion of wind turbines and solar farms, but there is an aspect about energy conservation programs and things like that. All municipalities are required to report on those types of things, so there is support for energy conservation programs and opportunities for small renewable facilities where appropriate and feasible on county properties and facilities. Chapter 8 is natural heritage. We've tried to simplify some of the goal statements there and have wording that's consistent with the PPS. We've tried to provide some clarification on natural areas and acknowledge where we have gaps in our data. There are some things the PPS requires us to deal with where there really is no data or mapping available to deal with them. So we've acknowledged that. Endangered and threatened species, the Endangered Species Act is new since the current official plan, so we reference that. The one thing I do want to mention directly here is a proposal to change the criteria for significant woodlands in the county from 4 hectares to 2 hectares in size. This comes from specifically from some background work in natural heritage that we've been doing, and also from support for protection and enhancement of the natural heritage system that we've heard from organizations like the Chamber of Commerce, the agricultural organizations within limits and within reason, but they certainly do generally support the enhancement of natural heritage system. We heard through the branding exercise that for people from outside the county have taken note of the natural heritage features of the county when they visit here. And we've certainly, again, we've heard from the Chamber of Commerce, I believe, that the enhancement of the natural heritage system is good for business. We've run that idea past our Ag Advisory Committee, the agricultural organizations in general. We put that out there through the background reports, and we had no comment on that whatsoever in terms of negative feedback. So where this comes into play, and I want to make sure everyone understands, is really when we're dealing with development. So what that means right now is, in theory, a development proponent could come to us with a proposal that includes a 9-acre, 4 hectares is 10 acres. So they could come in with a proposal that affects a 9-acre woodland, and really there's nothing legally we can do likely to prevent that from being negatively impacted. All this does is say we're going to lower the threshold for significance for those areas from 10 acres to 5 acres, and it allows us to at least ask for an environmental evaluation of that feature to make sure that no irreversible damage would be done to it. And that would apply to all types of development. It could be a subdivision, it could be a renewable energy project. Again, I think everyone would agree that a 9-acre woodland in Lambton County is a pretty big woodland just to have disappear from the landscape. So that's really all we're trying to accomplish here. And
Councillor Arnold.
But really, truth be known, it doesn't matter how big the woodland is, that if you have a subdivision, and I'll go to the one that was built straight south of Lambton College, didn't matter about the woodland because it was designated as residential, so they all got knocked down and houses built. So we can say that and ask for another study, but we're not going to stop it. You know, and that's no different than a major industry coming in. We'll make sure that that major industry gets built. We may rejig them a little bit, but we'll make sure that the thing's going to get done. Like, we're not going to stop them. And asking for another study, what's that going to do? What is that going to help? And by dropping it from 10 acres down to 5 acres, are we really going to impact anything in a positive way versus leaving it at 10 acres? And you're absolutely right. The 9-acre woodland disappearing, it's a tragedy, but they've disappeared bigger than that in this county over the years if there's development that's asked for, and we're trying to have economic development. And that's the last thing we worry about is that 100-acre bush over there that's that's sitting there, it just goes. And if I have 5 acres of bush on my property and I burn wood, within 5 years I can have it down so that I don't meet the minimum requirements for amount of trees in a wood lot, and I can go clear it anyways. And there's nothing that the county can do or would do to stop that, because we've had those discussions in the past with people that will eke out a bush and eventually the bush will be gone no matter what. And because it doesn't meet the minimum criteria of trees in that area. So I wonder why we need to ask somebody to do yet another study on something that's smaller when it's not going to really make any difference, because the planning group, whether it's locally or whatever, is not going to turn down a big subdivision. They're not going to turn down a new industrial plant or a manufacturing facility that was talked about. Like, that's not going to happen. And we aren't encouraging them to go to other spots that are already available. We're just asking them to do a study. So I guess I struggle with adding that one more study for somebody to do that's really not going to do a lot to change what their plans are originally, because we want the development here, unless I'm totally misreading it.
Yeah, I guess just one point of clarification is that you talk about the subdivision that may have been designated residential, and that happens. There have been situations where under a previous, it's been designated that way for decades. But I guess what this would say is if the standard does get moved to 5 acres, then those would not be designated residential. They would be designated in a woodland or environmental protection category, and they wouldn't be a development area unless demonstrated through that homework that it's appropriate.
How do you talk to a person that's owned a piece of property for 40 years and was under the impression they could do whatever with, and now through our official plan we're saying, well, you can no longer do anything you want with that piece of property. We're putting you out of business essentially, and I may have bought that thinking that and paid a premium to get it to do something with it. And this is not the complaint, but the challenge I get on a regular basis, and I'm sure you guys do too. How can you come in and put new legislation in place and limit what I can do to my farm or what I can do to my piece of property I bought for development in time or whatever, and I've owned this thing and bought it a long time ago, and now all of a sudden you guys are slipping this stuff around that I can't do this anymore. And I guess and maybe it's just a comment more than a question, but it's a frustration I have, because I get the right of ownership tossed back to me on a regular basis that I bought this farm, I bought this piece of property, I should be able to develop it. And now you're telling me that because, and we talk about natural heritage, the wetland stuff is becoming stronger because the goal of the region is to have 10% wetland coverage. We want to have 28% forest coverage. We want to have people live in houses, and we want bigger farms. But where's all this land coming from? We haven't made any more, but every time we ask for more trees planted, and if it's not voluntary or holding on to things or asking for more wetlands, they're coming from existing agricultural land, because that's really the only thing that has any mix to it at all that you can develop anything on is bare land. And yet it just seems like there's more restrictions on these people on a regular basis, and yet their costs are higher. The value of the land is higher, even for agriculture. So, and once again, it's probably just a comment, but I find it very frustrating that we're trying to impose things on people that have owned properties and tell them what they can and can't do, and yet we don't lead by example by going out and buying farms and converting them to trees and wetlands, but we're telling David here that he can't farm a piece of his property because he may have 5 hectares or 5 acres of bush on it or something like that he can't do anything with that. So it's a struggle that I sit as I go through this whole document. We're becoming very, very restrictive, a lot more layers of laws and things that you cannot do this, you cannot do that on property that you have owned or are in the process of owning, and that sort of thing. So, but I don't see in here anything about encouraging engineered wetlands for sewage treatment facilities or outlets of creeks into the natural environment that may have a high phosphorus level. Like, there's not that encouragement. There's a lot of restrictions, but not a lot of encouraging. Because as we look at my own sewage treatment plants in my municipality and the sewage lagoons, probably an intermediate step for those would be a good encouragement to have those as engineered wetlands of 10 to 20 acres or whatever that is, to try and make sure that what you're sending out from the human footprint is going to be pretty benign by the time it gets out into the, in my case, the Sydenham or the St. Clair or Bear Creek or whatever. And yet we aren't talking about that in this document. It's more restrictive, going right back to the private landowner. And that's where I get beat up quite often with some of these documents. And then the other thing, I'll go back, that the county talks about losing population and everything else, but the rural end of the county, we don't want people to live there. We want mega farms that grow corn, beans, and wheat. We don't want small farms that encourage development. So we do everything we can throughout the official plan to get rid of smaller acres and have farm lot consolidations, no building of houses, all that good stuff to make us let nobody lives in anything that's farmable. And I think that's where we're really missing the boat when we go through the official plan piece. And so the other thing that I saw in the official plan document itself, there's a lot of things that used to be called rural areas being changed to agricultural areas, but it's not all of them. It's inconsistent in the actual document, just like there's some inconsistencies that the St. Clair Parkway at the start of the document is referred to as County Road 33. It hasn't been that way for 20-some years. And yet back in the document, I found another spot where it was referred to as the Parkway without the County Road designation. So I think there's some dress up that needs to be done in the final document to make it totally relevant before it goes anywhere else from this chamber. So.
And I guess to the councillor's point, and from this chair, if members of council have specifics that they've noted along the vein of what Councillor Arnold has suggested, maybe what you could do is get them to Mr. Posliff directly, and then if there's housekeeping stuff in the plan itself, he can deal with it outside of this meeting. I have Councillor Broad and then Councillor Gillis, and I don't think I missed anybody else yet. Oh, and Councillor Napper, sorry.
Thanks, Warden McDougall. Question for Dave. So is the 4 hectare in the provincial policy statement? Sorry, for the significant woodland.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Broad. The provincial policy statement says we must protect significant woodlands, and the standards that implement that are found in the Provincial Natural Heritage Manual, and I think the provincial policy statement may refer to that. So that's where the 4 hectares is found.
Just to follow up then, and I appreciate the Chambers of Commerce thinking that these are wonderful to look at and all the tourism that's brought on by them, but to go from 2 hectare to 4 hectare, if the Chamber thinks it's so wonderful along with everybody else, what's the compensation for the individual, as Steve has touched base with, and I hear it all the time from the farmers and from the rural area, what's their compensation from now we're restricting them that much farther? Is there any compensation if it's that important to everybody else who doesn't have them? What's the compensation to the person that does have them?
Is that a comment?
No, I just want to know if there's a compensation in there.
Okay. Is there compensation?
I don't think there's any particular provision for it, no.
Okay. Councillor Gillis, then Councillor Napper.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Madam Warden. Again, back to the same question, really concerned about the redesignation of some lands when it's already zoned one way in an official plan of a community. So, for example, coming back to what Councillor Arnold was saying with regard to that particular wood lot that was turned residential, but was residential for a very long time. How can we supersede or override something that's already being developed from an economic point of view, or putting out as an economic development plan, and this will override everything? So how are we going to reconcile when we're trying to promote economic growth? So if you understand my question, it's very much along the same lines as what everyone else said. But I really see this is a discussion that we really are going to have to broaden out a little bit more, I think.
Okay. Those detailed decisions will always be made through the local official plans and zoning bylaws. So that's where that specific discussion will come into place.
If I understand it correctly, though, when we already made our official plan and have already had our zoning put in place, we have to bring it to you, to the county, for final approval.
Eventually, yes. Not zoning, but official plan changes, yes.
But the fact I'm making is, if we have already had something, and then now you're saying significant woodlands have to be saved and they have to be this certain size, that's going to change the dynamic quite a bit, hypothetically speaking. I can't give you a specific at this point in time, but to me, there's an issue here.
Councillor Napper.
I have a question. It's happened in Lambton, Wyoming, where somebody has invested in, say, a 10-acre parcel or 5-acre parcel with the idea that they're going to build for the retirement, so they plant trees in it, the little stick trees. Then when it comes time to build, they go to get a building permit, and they said, no, you can't build there because of the trees. Is there provisions in there if you pass that significant woodlot, when the time comes, would they get a minor variance to go in there and clear, or they basically sterilize that property from building on it? I know it's happened. And
Thank you, Councillor Napper. There have been instances in the past where someone owns a piece of property that is entirely woodlot, whether it's 2 acres or 5 or 20. And there has been an allowance made for that type of situation. So it can be done.
A lot of times the people aren't aware of that. I know I've done it myself. I put a fair amount of trees in my property. Wasn't aware that. So if they come for a building permit, do you allow them to cut a laneway in and take out an envelope to build in, or is that?
Again, there have been, I think in the past, we've had minor variance applications for that, and they've been approved.
From this chair, I'd also say that I know in the city of Sarnia, we have often done out along the lake and with that same subdivision that Councillor Arnold spoke about. They have to go get a registered tree plan. They have to work with an arborist, and there's tree preservation policies in our own official plan at the local level that says they have to develop a plan and it has to be approved through the planning and building department. So that, I don't know whether there's an application for that on some of these larger developments, Councillor Arnold. Maybe, in fact, what works on the small could be encouraged at the big. I don't know. Anyways, Mr. Posliff, if you could move on.
Policies to help minimize threats to water courses and water sources. Again, that's a kind of a source water protection issue. Notations about CA, Conservation Authority regulations, and reference to the Natural Heritage Study for guidance in setting out those detailed mapping situations. Chapter 9 is our mineral resources.
Warden Bean.
Thank you. I know you've had quite a morning. I'm looking at this right off the bat. We're to advise the province that when they develop new regulations for capping abandoned wells, like what kind of wording are we talking about, and how are you looking at? It says in there from neighbors or whatever. I'm just curious about that because there already is the OPI that directs or helps write these.
Thank you, Warden. Councillor Veen, thanks for that question. I can certainly explain that one. This came up a number of years ago. Basically the framework says is that where there's an identified oil or gas well on a property that has not been properly capped, development is not to occur within a certain distance of that until it is properly capped. I forget the distance specifically, but the situation could conceivably come up, especially in central Lambton, where property owner A wants to build a new house in the middle of town. Property owner B next door has a well in the backyard that was never properly capped. Property owner A cannot build that house until that's done and really has no mechanism to force B to do it. So we end up with a possibility of sterilizing properties in the middle of our urban areas. So we just want to make sure that we're in on that conversation as that gets developed.
Thank you for that, because that's actually happening in Oil Springs right now, where we have an area that we can't get the wells capped on, and the government doesn't seem fit. So we would like to utilize that area, but we can't. So that's why I brought it up.
Second point there is encourage more comprehensive rehabilitation planning for aggregate sites in the county, and talk about maybe looking at things like encouraging conservation and recycling of on-site aggregate resources and providing facilities that can be accessed by municipalities and the public to deposit materials that can be recycled for aggregate use. Again, not a mandatory thing, but just an encouraging thing.
Councillor Gillis.
Just taking that one step further, and thank you, Madam Warden, for recognizing me. I've seen in other municipalities and certainly in other provinces where they've taken sites that were former aggregate purposes and turned them into something much more rather than recycling facilities. So would it be possible for you to broaden that out? Butchart Gardens comes to mind in British Columbia. It's a huge tourism attraction, and it was made out of an old quarry. So there are other things. There are also recreational things that can be done at quarry sites. So could that be expanded a little bit? Also, perhaps there might be brownfield monies that would be available for that type of redevelopment. So I've seen it in Alberta and I've seen it in British Columbia now through the travels that I've done on behalf of the county. So I think that there's an untapped resource that we're not utilizing as much as we could.
Thank you, Councillor. And I think that falls under that second bullet. Is sort of after the aggregate has been extracted, how do we rehabilitate the site? The last one is more while the operation is ongoing. So there's a bit of a distinction there.
Today,
follow up.
True, thank you. True enough, but it does say recycling facilities, that kind of thing, and I think there's more than that you could do than just that. So that's my point.
And I guess I would point to the second bullet that says more comprehensive rehab planning for the aggregate sites, which could be after all the extraction is finished.
Finally, Chapter 10 is our implementation section. It's the last chapter in the official plan. And so what we've done is just included some new general policies for subdivision and condominium design related to the ability to service the lands, road access. Delivery of emergency services is important. We try to avoid a situation where we have an entire 60 or 80 lot subdivision with one single access point. That could be a recipe for disaster. So all those types of things we want to put in as guidelines there. And finally, the last bullet there is removal of any references to the general local official plan, affectionately known as the GLOP. That was put in place at the time the current plan was done to help develop local municipal plans, and I think it's served its purpose a couple of times over, and we don't need that in there anymore. So I guess, Warden McDougall, I'll leave it to you from here, knowing that we're on a deadline.
I'm going to recognize one more question from Councillor Arnold.
I could do one. Well, nobody's got anything else to do today. There's a number of references in the official plan document, the draft, as far as the local municipalities, and for some strange reason, it's only the local municipalities. It's not the county offering incentives for housing, incentives for business, and incentives for all these things. I thought we were restricted, that we could not give incentives to businesses to locate or businesses to grow. And is that not sending the wrong signal to people that might want to come into the community, that The county official plan encourages us lower tier people to give money to people to come to my community to build places or to build businesses or whatever, when I'm not sure if it's legal for us to do. And also, I know I don't have deep enough pockets to start funding Kevin to come to St. Clair Township and build a business. But then when Bill wants to come and do it, I got to say no to him. Like, I can't be consistent because I don't have that much money. And yet it seems the county official plan, it's okay for the county to say, well, go see the local guys because they'll give you money to come, or give the impression that we'll give money to come. So I would like to see those types of statements removed. Don't encourage me to give incentives to people. If I can do it or will want to do it, I'll find a way to do it. But don't have it in a public document that people will have an expectation that if they come and see Kevin or Steve or Larry, that we're going to be standing there with a bag of money to give them to come and to locate or build some affordable housing or to start a new business, please.
Council, just before we go any further, from pages 24 to 46, Mr. Poslev provided for all of us a review of public comments and responses that were made back. There's a significant number of pages. Would you like to manage them as a bundle if any of you had any specific questions to any of those? I would open the floor for you to come forward now. Otherwise, I think, in interest of timing, we'll move to the overall section. Anything from council? Okay. Go ahead then to page 47, Mr. Poslev.
The overall section, again, was just sort of a summary of how we got here. We are trying to be encouraging. We are trying to look at things like quality of life, and thank you. And certainly, as we've had discussion today, there will always be a regulatory aspect to official plans. We really can't avoid that. But we are trying to open things up where we can. We are trying to provide for some diversity in the agricultural economy. We are trying to have a larger focus on quality of life issues. We're known for affordability and quality of life now, but I think we can build on that. And we want to make a county that obviously people will continue to want to be in, and that we can either retain the people we have and attract some new ones and try to counteract those trends that we've been seeing. Last point was just on the approval process. Once adopted by County Council, and again, we're some ways off from that, the official plan will be forwarded, must be forwarded to the Municipal Affairs Ministry, and they will make sure that all those provincial policies are complied with and that we're not doing anything we're not supposed to be. And ultimately, Ontario Municipal Board appeals are always a possibility after that provincial approval. So that's all I had. Thank you for your time. If there's anything that you have going forward, specific questions, comments, please make sure we get them, and we'll do our best to have a look at them.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Poslev. I'm going to refer council now to a recommendation with respect to the review here this morning on page 51. I'd be looking for somebody to move that motion. This would be to implement a program of public consultation to come back to us again. Councillor Gillis, Councillor Case, discussion, all in favor? That motion is carried. Thank you. Okay. Now, Mr. Broad.
Thank you for the mister. I believe
Sorry, my apology, Councillor Broad.
Wonderful. I should come up and give you a hug. At the last county council meeting, we had dealt with the report we didn't deal with the report that Dave and his staff had prepared for us. And the recommendation was at that point that we bring it to this meeting today. And I think it's time that we do something with this report. I can't support the recommendations that's in the report at the back. I do appreciate the work that went into it and some of the information that's in it. I'd like to make a motion that we receive and file this report.
Councillor Case seconds that. Discussion. Councillor Napper.
Is that the reduction, that motion you brought forward?
Not yet. It's just on the report. That's all I'm asking.
So the motion is to receive and file the report that Mr. Broad had asked for to come back to our October 7th meeting, and it was ultimately referred here. He's indicated that he wants to receive and file, and perhaps there's a motion coming following. Okay, all in favor of the motion? Opposed? That's carried. Did you have a follow-up, Councillor Broad?
I do have a follow-up, but it's not a motion. The follow-up is we're going to go to the public with this draft policy. What's the process of getting the changes in the draft before we go to the public?
Mr. Posliff?
Thank you, Warden McDougall. My suggestion would be that this is the venue to get whatever changes made that you would like. That the motion that was just passed with regards to implementing the public consultation process included the wording subject to any revisions that Council wants made. So I would suggest, Warden McDougall and Councillor Broad, that this is the venue to direct staff to do what you want us to do.
Have you a motion then, Councillor Broad?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that remove the 40-hectare, 100-acre minimum lot size out of the official plan.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Arnold. Discussion. Councillor McKenzie.
By doing that, are you looking at putting any restrictions, or is it just wide open?
Councillor Broad.
There is, as far as restrictions, you still have your official plan. If you want to leave it at 100-acre, Larry, leave it at 100-acre. If you want to make it 50, that's up to you. That's the whole point of what I'm doing here is I'm not restricting anybody sitting around this table one bit. I don't want to restrict that. I would never make a motion that would put something in restriction. The other thing is it goes above and beyond the provincial policy statement. There's nothing in the provincial policy statement that states that size. So that's what I'm asking for. I don't want to restrict anybody. I respect everybody around this table, and I don't want to restrict you. All I'm asking you is don't restrict me by leaving it in there. Thank you.
Councillor Bruzewitz, then Councillor McGugan.
My vote on this issue will not surprise anybody, whether it's a Sunday shopping or another regulatory measures. I always believe the market is the best regulator there is. It shouldn't be up to me as a council member to decide what's the viable parcel size. People can move, to 10 acres lot, and perhaps if they find a way to grow white truffles that can sell for $6,000 a pound, I don't know whether it's possible because that's generally the Mediterranean climate, but obviously, that can make it viable on its own. And also, the other reason I'm supporting this motion is because planning issues should be really be at the discretion of the local community, not at the big brother, at the big county. So Councillor Broad has my strong support.
Councillor McGugan.
Ward, members of County Council. Now, I do farm, or I at least try to farm. Now, I understand and sympathize with Councillor Broad. Now, I've gone through this for nearly the last 20 years. I sat through an OMB hearing in your municipality at the Rutherford Fire Hall, had Wayne Caldwell, who is a farmer and a planner and a professor at the University of Guelph, come to the municipality of Brook Galveston 3 or 4 years ago, and where we went through the very same thing, made an excellent presentation on a whole raft of reasons why it shouldn't happen, had a few why it could and maybe could happen, and he's still out there. I wasn't smart or quick enough to think of even have him come make a presentation here. Now, doing some checking, I understand that the Don Euphemia, 42% of your land today is 50 acres or smaller, which comes to about 617 properties. Do you feel that by having more, you'll get more small businesses, that you'll get more houses built on the side roads? I'm in a quandary as to how to vote. So,
Councillor Broad, did you want to respond to that?
Sure, thanks, Bev. Yeah, so is this going to change the world for Don Euphemia? Absolutely not. But let's look at the past. The past hasn't worked. Our population has declined. It hasn't worked. So are we going to keep going down that road? You know, we're here promoting all this stuff, agritourism, all this stuff. To Steve's point, we're here promoting all that stuff in our official plan, and we're putting all these roadblocks up. And I don't understand the roadblock going beyond a provincial policy statement. I just don't understand why we're heading down that direction with anything that we have that is more restrictive than the provincial policy statement. We all sit here as councillors and we complain about the provincial government and the restrictions, the regulations, the guidelines. And here we are promoting more stricter regulations than our provincial policy has today. So is it going to change the world for Don Euphemia? No. But you know what? If I get one new house next year, that's one new house that's going to start something different. I've got a school that's going to be under review. I have no population to fill my school. Yeah, we're all upset about the schools. We're going to close. But if we don't have people live in our municipality to fill those, they're all going to close. We talk about infrastructure. Who's going to support Ontario? Ontario Hydro isn't going to support us if we have one house down a road. They can't. So it's up to us how we want around this table, how we want to set the County of Lambton's official plan. It's up to us. What I'm asking for is not going to restrict Don McGugan. If you still want the 100 acre, you can still have it. It's under your own official plan. You can still do whatever you want. Referring back to the 2000 OMB hearing, the biggest thing that they told us why we lost, because we were fighting the county. That's who we were fighting. Don Euphemia took on the County of Lambton because we didn't believe in the restriction they had. Chatham-Kent went to the OMB, and they won because they weren't fighting anybody else. They were just taking on the Minister of Ag and Food. You know, we're worried about this fragmentation of farmland and all this stuff that's in this policy. Look at the frickin' windmills around us, guys. Laneway after laneway after laneway. And they're not worried about the agricultural land. Why is it on the backs of the shoulder of the people of Don Euphemia and the County of Lambton for the mistakes of the province of Ontario? It shouldn't be. That's all I'm asking is a support that's not going to affect anybody sitting around this table. What I'm asking, you still can keep it in your own official plan, and thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Broad. Councillor Merritt, you had a comment to make.
Thank you, Warden Bev. Councillor Broad did a really good job of explaining a lot of the thoughts that's been going through my head, and I would only add, because some of the criticisms that we've heard is that, you know, the floodgates are going to open and you're going to have a request every month, which is totally ludicrous because in the past we've went against, haven't been taken to the OMB, but have went against the official plan and had some smaller severances, and they've made sense because they've either been in an area that's been cut in half by the right-of-way of the power line going through our municipality from one side to the other, and which sliced off a lot of portions. And there are many areas that still make sense to have a small area. And it's not like you're going to have a farmer come in every month, severing 100 acres in two. It's just not going to happen because there's a lot of people don't want smaller. And so as Councillor Broad says, it gives you options, and I don't think you have to fear the possibilities, you know. So thanks, Councillor Broad, for being so eloquent. Almost as good as Mr. Trudeau.
One more. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a long meeting. We'll just keep order for the last few minutes. I am going to recognize one more comment from Councillor Bushy, and then I'm going to call the vote on the motion from Councillor Broad.
I just want to say my friend on my left made a good argument, and he has my support.
Councillor Napper.
He is a very convincing young man, I'll say that. These young bucks come over here. How's that going to affect, if I got a 100-acre farm and we go to, say, 50, can I sever that 100 acres into 250s? And
Mr. Poslev?
Thank you, Councillor. If 50 acres becomes the standard and is approved by the province, then yes. That would allow the severance of a straight 100 into 250s.
Councillor Broad, response to that.
Only if you change your official plan from where it is today from 100 to allow you to move down to 50, you can do that. Yes. That isn't what we're asking you to do, Lonnie. That's one thing. I don't want this as a 50-acre issue. This is an issue where we're removing the 100-acre out of the county official plan, and unless you change what you're doing today, you have a 100-acre in your official plan today, because that's very concurrent with what the county official plan is. So unless you change something, then no, nothing changes for anybody around this table.
Councillor Weber.
Thanks, Warden. Just for clarification, so we would be taking the 100 acres out of the Lambton County plan and replacing it with the wording that is consistent with the provincial policy statements, which I understand they don't have a number there. They have a viability and a way to do that. So that's still there, what's in the provincial policy statements. Our plan would be consistent with them.
Our real change agent, Councillor Broad, is indicating that is so. Any other comments? Seeing none? Oh. Mr. Poslev.
Sorry, thank you, Warden. Just so Council has all the information, I just wanted to reiterate that we did speak a lot with the agriculture community on this. Our Ag Advisory Committee recommended the 100. We spoke with the Lambton Federation and the Ontario Federations of Agriculture. They said that they were fine with 50 acres, but they didn't want to see it go below that. So just so you have all that information.
Thank you. Motion on the floor. All in favor? That motion is unanimous. That carries.
Thank you.
Councillor Arnold.
Warden McDougall, members of County Council, and maybe it's not an issue in anybody else's area but my own, but I'm just wondering if there is anything in the official plan, and I haven't seen anything yet, or if there is a thought of maybe putting something in the official plan in regards to agricultural property ownership. I know the feds and the province has looked at things like that in the past, but my single biggest purchaser of properties are out of Lambton County people coming, and some are pension funds. They are driving the price of farmland up tremendously. I know that it's been talked about freedom and capitalism and all that good stuff here today, even that we don't want to restrict those types of things. But I'm just wondering if it's a discussion that's been had at the planning area level. I guess I feel sorry for a lot of the younger people that are trying to establish farms, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to see the opportunity for smaller acreages, of course. Because when I have a group that's coming and have bought 1,000, 1,500 acres at a time, and I know it's not local ownership, because we see the purchasers, of course, and where they go. And is that something that we would even look at trying to regulate through the official plan? Or is that something that we should just leave it to the free market? And I'm just wondering if that conversation has taken place. Because that's one of the single biggest drivers of expensive farmland in my community is pension funds coming in, unlimited pockets, and they are driving that price up exponentially so that the local people, it's very hard for them to afford to buy property, A, to establish, or B, to expand.
Mr. Posliff, do you have a response to that?
Thank you, Warden McDougall. Just in a general sense, we've certainly had that conversation. We're aware of those trends. Farming is becoming increasingly corporate and global, like much of the other elements of our economy. So we're certainly aware of that situation, but I'm not sure from a planning standpoint there's anything we can do about it.
Is there anything else on the official plan? No? Okay. Before we go to notice of bylaws, I'm going to recognize a request that was made of me from Councillor Boucher this morning. I'll put the floor over to you, Councillor Boucher.
Just a simple motion I'd like to make that the warden on our behalf writes a thank you letter to Pat Davison, thanking her for her excellent service to our community during the last 4 years as an MP for this area.
Seconded by Councillor Broad. Discussion? Councillor Napper.
On that same regards, the town of Lambton, Wyoming, the mayor, council, and staff are having a appreciation dinner for Pat Davison on November the 18th. Tickets are available through Robin or at the office up there. We'll be sending an invitation out to each individual council. It's on a Wednesday night. We're hoping to honor her there that night for her years of service, and we welcome any municipality that comes. If any of you wish to make a presentation to her, if you feel solely inclined, just let me know, and it'll be a nice evening there, and we welcome you all.
Thank you, Councillor Napper. And further to that, and in line with your request, Councillor Boucher, since I've committed to attending that, I would be happy to make that part of an acknowledgement on behalf of all of you at that event, and we'll make an appropriate recognition of her time and contribution, not just to the community as a whole, but also through her many years of dedication in this chamber. Okay? All right. Councillor Gillis.
Thank you, Madam Warden, and I've already got my tickets, so thank you. I was just noting that you had mentioned 4 years of service, and Pat Davison has been our MP since 2006, so it's a little longer than 4 years.
Thank you. All in favor of that motion? That's unanimous. Okay. Notice of bylaws. Mr. Cribbs, quickly, we've got hangry councillors here.
Happily, Warden, there's a motion moved by Councillor Cook, seconded by Councillor Gilliland, that bylaws number 30 of 2015 as circulated be taken as read a first and second time.
All in favor? That's carried. Mr. Cribbs.
Warden, there's also a motion moved by Councillor Marriott and seconded by Councillor McCharles that bylaw number 30 of 2015 as circulated be taken as read a third time and finally passed.